Okay.
You want to roll into it?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, cool.
Okay,
Konrad, thanks for coming. I'm glad we could finally do this.
Dude, Chris, honestly, I've been very, very excited about this. I've like thoroughly thought about, okay, what do we talk about? You know, I met your brother, and he's a very nice guy, Greg. Tremendous, sitting here in the
tremendous.
corner.
He's a tremendous guy.
Tremendous guy, big hands, very, very
Huge
strong,
hands,
present,
beautiful hands.
great stream. It's all amazing, and just wealth of information. And then I met you, and then I'm like, look, the flip side of the coin. Likewise, very charming, and I'm like, look, you got a whole setup here, and I want to check it out, and here we are. And
yeah, dude.
So yeah. I think what was the thing that you're saying? Maybe my story about my dad. You really liked that on my.
Yeah, tell me about that because when we first met, we met over in the main area at 239, and I was talking to you, financial advising, all this stuff, and then you're like, "Yeah, check this out," and it was pretty interesting. So I wanted to talk to you about that. Mm-hmm. There's some like philosophy quotes and stuff on your website too.
Yes,
I want to ask you about. But how did you get into this?
Okay, great question.
And what do you do?
Okay, great follow-up question.
Yeah, these are the money-making questions.
Yeah,
right here.
well, I think why statement. Why do I get up in the morning? And I mean, truly, I can honestly say this with my whole heart. I love what I do. Right now, I'm on the clock. I get to be sitting across from you, Greg, diagonally. I mean, this is morning of champions. And so why do I do what I do? I mean, it really started off when I was around 5 years old. And anytime I'd go on the street and find a nickel, dime, or I'd have $1 extra from lunch or some extra birthday money, or grandma gave me a 20. I mean, that was huge sums back then.
Buku bucks.
And I'd put it away. I'd put it away to this old wooden cigar box that my father gave me. And I mean, it would like kind of creak open slowly and have the hula girls on the side. And they were always so happy, wide smiles. And every time I'd put some little money away. And then one day, my dad, he's formal. He's an anesthesiologist by trade, well educated. So he's like, hey, comes to me and he's like, good morning, son. And says, I'm going to be going to the grocery store. I'd rather not stop by the ATM on the way. Would you mind if I borrowed $20? And I'm like, at that moment, my heart glowed. I mean, here's the man that like put the roof over my head, put the food on my table, anything that we ever needed, the biggest safety net ever he provided. And I was able to help him. And I'm like, of course, Dad. Like, he would, when he would tell the story, you'd say, of course, Daddy, but I never say Daddy. I would say, of course, Dad.
We don't use Daddy.
Daddy, no, come on. That's a little bit too friendly. We have a pretty, it's a father-son relationship, but it's a little formal there too. So I was like,
Daddy shit.
Yeah, there's, of course, Dad. So I hand him the 20, and the next morning he comes in my room and he's like, knocks on the door. He's like, hey, son, here's the money that you lend me. And then he opens his wallet again and then slowly peels out another 10. And then my eyes glowed like saucers. I was like, whoa, because to me, $10 was like $1 million. I just got 50% of my investment in the day. This has to be like a racketeering scheme. And then he tells me, he's like, son, this is interest. And then from that day on, I'm like, I'm hooked. Anything I could on finance, on retirement, I try to just gobble it up. I talked to my father's financial planner, and I just loved it. And then so I knew like that, like very, very early on. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the names, the lingo. I was just like, look, I want to be a money man. I want to be able to figure out how to make people's dreams come true.
How to turn money into more money too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really like meet people's goals. Like that was like, whatever that goal is, if it's starting a business like we are here, or if it is helping somebody through retirement or helping somebody through their midlife, aches and pains of like, hey, I have family, I have kids, how do I, work through this? All those pieces, that's what really, brought me joy. And
so how old were you when that happened?
5 or 6. I mean, really.
So that happened when you were like 5?
Yeah, that was the kernel of my existence was, very, very young age to.
Damn, banking up 20s by 5 years old.
I know. I didn't know where to spend it. I mean, whenever I remember graduating high school, I got a scholarship from our art club. I was in the art club, and I received $500. And I was like, well, that's a little nice. But by that time, because my little treasure trove, I had put away thousands of dollars, just like money that I've earned.
One day, $1 here,
$1 there.
here.
So I was like, that's nice, but I'm already coming into college with some. So, but yeah, so that's really kind of where that my little origin story of like superhero origin story, and that's where that came from.
So what kind of art did you do?
Great question. I in school I really loved portraiture. I think portraiture was one of my all-time favorite. Not many people know that actually about me, that I can paint and do landscapes. I really like urban landscapes, especially. And the biggest collectors of my work obviously are my parents. They still have very many of my paintings hanging, and actually my father has my biggest one, so that was the one I gave him. It's a urban landscape of University of Houston. That's where I went for my freshman and sophomore year.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep.
At least you have some fans of your work. Yeah, I think my mom and my one friend are like the only people that listen to my music. So I understand the feeling. Yeah, I did an art class in college where it was like a drawing class, and then one day I decided to skip class, and that was the one day that there was a naked woman in the class. So I didn't get to be there when that happened, but they said, yeah, we're going to do that again the next class. So I showed up to the next class, and it was like a fat dude.
Every time. That's what they think. They think it's like, oh, you go to an art class and you're like, oh, it's going to be like the prettiest girls and like great. No, you show up to like college level art classes and it's the guys that are like, super confident with their body, and, life hasn't been nice to them. So the great thing is like, I have great training because I didn't learn on the like beautiful curves of, young women. I learned on like, hey, look, this is experience talking. I have some, cuts and bruises. Like I lived life, and that's, you looked at my sketchbooks. That's what they showed.
I live life just like these men I drew.
Yeah. I mean, that's my philosophy too on life. I don't want to like end life that I'm like, look, here's my pristine body in perfect preservation, hands crossed, and I go. No, I deal with, death and taxes, because those are the only two real constants all the time, like every day. And, and I see it and I'm like, look, I want to like end up in a shallow grave being catapulted in with, just barely making it. Like I want to live life to the fullest.
Would you want to ever be sent out with like a Viking funeral where they like shoot you out into the Gulf or something and somebody fires like a fucking bow and sets you on fire?
Well, you know what? Like that is a really interesting concept because in our estate planning, that's not a checkbox yet. And I honestly should include that as a checkbox that like, look, we should have Viking funeral as an option. Cremation's often one, or burial, or there's a lot of options there. But Viking funeral, I'm remiss to say that's not on our checkbox. We really should have that. That would be an awesome way to.
We need to do it out of a channel. What would be a worse way to have a Viking funeral? Is they do it, and then one of those parasailing boats at Fort Myers Beach like comes along.
Liability. I love it. Hey, but that would be a really cool YouTube video. So you can monetize that. That's a retirement plan all in itself.
That could be. So all right. So this all happened when you were 5, got you started going down this road.
Yep.
And then, so you went, so let's, I guess, skip over to college. So
sure. University of Texas.
Did you know that you were going for like finance? Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah.
Did you know that you were going for finance or?
No. Great question. I went for classics. Whenever one of the earliest memories I remember about education was that anytime an argument would be brought up, it would be like, all right, well, sure, but like, here's an older civilization that did it this way. Well, okay, but here's an older civilization that did it this way. So the ultimate authority was something like either biblical or through antiquity. And you had like, okay, like the Greeks or the Romans or the Egyptians, and like they, that was an authority of tradition or philosophy. And I'm like, look, that's what I have to learn. If I'm going to learn about the human condition, I have to begin at stage one, Mesopotamia, Tigris and Euphrates. Like that is the origin of civilization. And it was one of the greatest decisions, and I'm super, super grateful to my parents actually for being able to encourage me to do that. I didn't go into a trade school. I mean, nobody graduates with a classics degree and like, oh, okay, cool. Like, here's a job. No, and all my professors in the classics department, they were like Ivy League, like Yale, Harvard, PhDs. So with a classics degree, you have to have further education. It's not like you can do anything really with it. So I learned Greek, learned Latin, learned about ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and it sounds, Chris, like you're a fan of their philosophy and just that topic in general. So I am so thrilled to go into that too.
Well, and so I'm glad you brought it up. I don't know. I guess we planned this almost like a month ago, but the timing actually worked out because when we were talking about this last night. So a buddy of mine recommended this book. It's called First Principles, and basically it's like an assessment of the founding fathers, at least 4 of them, and how the ancient Roman and ancient Greek literature and all that stuff kind of shaped how they thought. And I'm just getting into it now, but it is really fascinating going back and seeing the way that people thought and then what they did right, what they did wrong, and then kind of how we can take that to the future. And actually, I started looking at some of this stuff maybe a year ago when... So COVID broke out, still working, still going into the office from like March until September, going hard, everything, just trying to make sure we were selling, doing all that stuff. And then when September rolled around, a bunch of things happened, but I finally had like a moment to kind of breathe mentally and take a step back. And I realized I didn't know anything that was going on in the world. I had shut myself off from the news, all that kind of stuff, because literally they're just lying and you couldn't learn anything. So I actually got some like books on ancient Egypt and like the ways that certain ideas have flowed from ancient Egypt through to Rome, through Greece, all these different places when they go out and tried it. So they tried to do this in like Turkey, or they tried to do this in Northern Africa, and then maybe they were in America earlier. But yeah, going through that process has started to help me understand the bigger picture of the world a little bit. Like, so when you started learning all this stuff, I mean, what were some of the biggest, I don't know, revelations that you had about, just like life
Chris,
in general?
We have an hour here. We can't. Yeah. We can't, like,
we got 45 minutes to make the most of it.
Yeah, I'm like, that's such a loaded question.
Well, this is what the people want to hear.
This is what the people want to hear. Well,
what they want.
I mean,
tell us the secret of life, Konrad.
Yeah, 23. Honestly, there's so much. Like, maybe like trying to narrowing it down a little bit. Okay, so one of the things that I really say, Aristotle. Okay, here's a great man. And one of the things I would say, life motto, I think for me, and even just like professionally as well, which I tend to apply, is in the Nicomachean Ethics, he really pushed that the best life is that one of the middle, the median. Like, don't go any extreme to any one side of like, hey, overindulge in food or overindulge in work even, like if you don't have a good life balance, that's an issue. Yeah. So I mean, I love his teaching. I mean, Nicomachean Ethics. I mean, if the the audience hasn't read that, it's just a really short piece, and man, do I totally abide by that kind of philosophy because it's so helpful. It's so helpful to realize the extremes of what we're capable of whether it comes to overindulging or underindulging. And anytime whenever you're pushed to those limits, you're actually hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself in not seeing the broad spectrum of what's there, what you're capable of. So for instance, I've been in this situation where I'm working 75, 80-hour weeks, and I hated my life. I was, overweight and working hard, making buku bucks, but guess what? I was unhappy. And at the end of the day, like, that was not where I wanted to be. And now, the same thing that I could recommend to my client is like, look, I think you should have balance. You should have balance in your retirement. You should have balance in, your workspace. And I think that's a really great principle that I took from ancient Greece is like, look, hey, don't go into anything 100% that to the extreme. You know?
So I agree. I think that's one of the things I like about Aristotle the most too, is like, and then you look at other things like the middle way and all these kind of things. There's a lot of different religions and philosophies that kind of reaffirm his thing. But so like, do you work with like a lot of the customers that you work with and clients and things like that? Do you feel like that is something that, not that they're lacking because they're incapable, but just maybe out of habit, like they're used to going like super hard?
Yeah. Well, I'd say like that's usually what the situation is. Usually it's an issue of, if somebody's financial health is out of whack, is because they have a situation where they're pushing a little bit too much to a certain direction that's not healthy for them. And I think, that's the same with like work-life balance. I was in a situation, I was working too hard and I wasn't doing anything after 5.
Yeah.
And here I am now when I do, 20 to 25 hours of sports every week. And I, have a thriving business. I have great colleagues. I mean, make connections like yourself that I'm like, look, this is, I enjoy doing this. Like, I'm happy. Like, look, we're talking about things that are amazing. And, the audience maybe will get something out of this conversation even more. And yeah, I think I think that's one of the key pieces is to do something that you can have a middle of the road approach. And, and at the same time, that kind of sounds not that great. Is like, not that it's like middle of the road, like it's ordinary, but it's that you're balancing a lot of extraordinary things with the other side of the coin too. So like, say for myself, it's like during the day, I am majority of the time using my mind and using my communication skills and my emotional skills. That's what I'm utilizing, 9 to 5, I'd say. But then after work, I am using more of my body, like, doing the sports, like playing golf, playing volleyball, pickleball. Love pickleball. Naples pickleball scene, 10 out of 10. I mean, this is where the world capital. It's like, you go there, there's 64 courts, and they're taken. During season, you have to wait in line. I mean, that's insane.
Are you bringing the median age down by like 20 years just being there? Or are there a bunch of
go ahead.
younger people there too?
Oh, the pros in pickleball. I mean, that is a whole community. I mean, there's guys that like switch, like, you're like, oh, look, I'm a pro in tennis, and it's kind of tougher field to get into. I'm switching to pickleball. Boom. Now I can be a pro for a country club in pickleball. And I have a buddy of mine, now he's playing in Colombia pickleball. And
holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exploding sport, especially here in Naples. I love it. 10 out of 10.
What is the trash talking in pickleball like?
Well, you don't want to get pickled.
That's right, Dennis. I just fucking spiked the ball right in your wife's face. Well, what are you going to do about it?
Hey, it gets intense. People get heated.
I bet. I mean, my grandma plays pickleball, and there's a lot of political debates that arise from somebody stepping over the line. Like somebody goes out of bounds or something.
Is she competitive? Is your grandma competitive?
I don't think so. I don't know.
He looks over at Greg. All right, Greg, let's see.
I don't know.
Get a thumbs up. No. He's like, maybe Greg knows grandma better.
Maybe. I don't think that she
has a hidden competitive
I don't think
spirit.
that she's just a little off the rails. Yeah, maybe not competitive. Just
Yeah.
She's a little out of her mind, but
Hey,
I think if
okay.
you're a grandparent and you're not out of your mind, I think you may have done life wrong.
Yeah, you don't want to be ordinary. Actually, no, that's a really good point, and I definitely live by that. I don't like ordinary people.
Yeah.
There's nothing more boring than somebody that's super normal.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do it. Like, I'll be like, look, I'm sorry. Like, you are too ordinary. We cannot be friends. Like, I cannot have somebody in my life that's just so plain Jane.
So, so when you were going through this phase of like working 75, 80 hours a week,
Yep.
doing all this stuff, you're moving your own business along, you're doing all this. Was there any kind of point where do you have like a definitive point in your mind where some of this stuff changed, or was it maybe a series of events? Like
really
how did
COVID. COVID was
Okay.
one of the, it's, and I hate to say this because it's a tragedy. The pandemic is definitely a tragedy. 1 in 500 Americans have died. It's a national tragedy, and across the globe. So it's definitely something very serious. However, I think the flip side of that coin, it has, and I've seen it too, created some tremendously positive things in the world.
Yeah.
Like remote working, understanding work-life balance more, prioritizing the most important things in your life. And that happened to me too. Firsthand, I'm like, look, do I really want to be working this amount? And like, is that the most important thing to me? And I realized no. Like, I realized I want to have my my daily routine of sports, daily routine of meeting like-minded individuals that are very active, that do triathlons, that run, and I love that. I love that. And that's, and I've met clients that way too. And then now I have clients that are like, look, I'd love to get into pickleball. And I'm like, guess what? I have the time slot for you. Let me send you a calendar invite. Like, that's going to be that's what I love, because you get to know a person, kind of going back to that, like, what's the, conversation like on the pickleball court? Well, for one, you really don't want to get pickled.
Yeah, I
Chris,
feel like it's like a given that you don't want to get pickled, but I didn't even know that getting pickled was a verb.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean? Getting pickled is if you lose a game 0-11, and then the other team pickled you, and you don't want to get pickled. That's a shame. That's a shame.
I feel like if I went and played with old people, I would probably get pickled.
Yes, and that's one of the beauties of this sport, is age is not a factor. I've seen guys that are so it's a 5 scale, right? Just very similar to tennis skill level. And there's guys and gals, across the spectrum of age that play, and a lot of it's the older community, obviously here in Naples. And the beauty of that, the sport, you can, it's less running than tennis, and it's more of a mental game. And I've definitely thoroughly have my butt kicked by guys that are twice my age, 3 times my age. And maybe not 3 times, but like 2.5.
Maybe 3 times.
Yeah, close. So so
you
pickled.
Just got pickled, bitch.
And then we had so there's another term. It's ernied. So when you get ernied, so you got to think, like, how did that come about, right? You have
what is that?
Yeah, so every rule has a backstory. So there had to be some guy named Ernie that was just like, man, this guy is just ridiculous. So on a serve, you serve one side to other, right, diagonally, when you're playing doubles. And on the other side from the serve, on the opposite side of the serve, you have a person that's standing right next to the kitchen, so right next to the front line of the net, essentially, as close to the net as you can. And if you serve and you hit that person as close to the net, it's said that that person has been ernied. So the guy Ernie, he must have been like, look, always at the net.
Serves.
Well, sort of. So
or it could be the
receiving.
Flip side.
Yeah. So maybe it was like either the guy's ripping serves and always hitting people, or he's the guy who's close to the net getting hit all the time. And then at that point, it's actually the server's point whenever they hit the person because they got in the way. So
yeah, I'd imagine Ernie probably had one of those like kind of floppy faded hats.
Yeah.
that he was wearing, and every time he'd get hit, maybe his hat would kind of like fall off or something.
Yeah. So it's either that, right? Or I like your thought of it. It's like the guy, he's just like epic serve, and he's just like, every time he serves, he's just like hitting people and putting welts.
Or he was like the 55-year-old in the 55+ community that was just ripping serves at 75 and 80-year-old.
Athletic his entire life.
So when you were going through, so COVID happened, it obviously made you reset. So like, what were some of the first things that you did to get out of this cycle of working that much without losing the productivity or without losing like the momentum that you had to kind of achieve the business goals that you were trying to achieve?
I think honest prioritizing my life instead of being like, look, my end goal is monetization of all my relationships. It's not. At the end of the day, I strongly believe that there's so much more added to value, like having a social safety net or having situations like this where, you know, you're brainstorming, you're having flow of ideas, and those kind of rewards are multiplying. And I've seen it. So it's like, instead of focusing on the end goal of, you know, the dollar bill, it's, you know, kind of like the thought process of just, you know, my like origin, my why story with my dad. It's learning opportunities, like utilizing your dollar to be a tool rather than a goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, it's more of it's almost like a philosophical change in how you look at priorities themselves, more so than even just like, well, I realized that if I was more efficient at this and then I could take this time. It's like you kind of had to start with the philosophical change of what you were actually going for and why, and then the priorities can kind of like fall in place following that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very true. It's very true.
Interesting. Yeah, because I'm kind of going through that with my business now. I'm starting it up, kind of in the zone of do that work for as many hours as you can, work nights or work on the weekends and things like that. I'm pretty okay with it right now.
Yeah.
It's, I'm just trying to get this stuff in place before I got a baby, you know, before the baby comes, and then
that's amazing.
Then I probably can't function. But so like I'm going through that now, but I kind of had a realization last night of some of these things that I am prioritizing are not necessarily exactly correct, and they're all like, it's weird because when I'm now thinking of this and my priorities, what they were, the actions that I was taking were kind of in line with those like philosophies that I had around it. And now that I realize that I kind of have to change the way I think about this. And even in, I don't know, I was just writing for like an hour last night. Even in that short period of time, it kind of made me realize that the activities and going this much and all this stuff aren't going to be the most productive to actually get me to like the goal. Yeah.
What is your like 1 to 3 year goal? Like, where do you vision this podcast being?
I want to grow this thing to be able to have a platform that I can pretty much reach out to anybody I want to and talk to them and pick their brain and learn more about life itself, learn things that I just didn't know, but also being able to kind of share some of this stuff with other people too. Because like, I feel like there are a lot of people that are similar to me or think similarly. Like, I'm not the smartest person ever, but like I do question things, and I think people have a lot of those same questions, but you don't really have an outlet to ask them, or you kind of feel like maybe like, I'm not like worthy of asking them. Like before I started a podcast, I wouldn't have come up to you and said like, hey dude, you know, how are you? Would you want to be on my podcast? We could talk about this and this. And like, I would have talked to you for sure, but you know, I wouldn't have felt like,
maybe this is like your safe space, your temple, like you are.
Yeah, but it's an avenue to explore some of these ideas. Avenue. So using this as a vehicle to open up new opportunities in life and whatever that may be, business opportunities to talk to people, as I get more like back into the music stuff, opportunities to talk to other musicians, to maybe collaborate with other people, and just find ways to make money through this as kind of like the driving vehicle. When it comes to the other stuff, like in business, it's definitely taking these things that I'm learning here as I'm putting this together and helping people replicate that or replicate the end result. So like what we're learning with like LinkedIn and the way that these things work, and you know, how to get people to engage with some of this stuff, and kind of the value that can bring to people for sales. Like that can be very valuable for companies and, you know, teams. So yeah, 1 to 3 years is kind of like all of these different approaches is moving things forward, but the specifics change all the time.
Yeah.
You know, like as you were starting your business, I mean, is it today exactly what you thought it was going to be?
I didn't even, 5 years ago, I didn't even think I was going to be in Florida.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
So how did you end up starting like your advisory firm and doing all this stuff? Like what did that start out with?
Well, I mean, I've been now in the industry for 14 years, going on 14 years. So the thing is that you know, you like your goal, like you have like kind of, it's like a funnel. I kind of imagine it. And like you're going to end up somewhere in this like shotgun approach, but you don't know exactly where. Well, you know, I've been thankfully, you know, dove hunting a lot, and you know, I've used a very nice Remington, and yeah, so sometimes, you know, you kind of you shoot the shotgun and you look at the pellets and like, all right, this is a really good pellet to focus on. So yeah, so I mean, okay, so that's 1 to 3 years, right? You're kind of doing that. What do you see like past that? What would you be like 3 to 6 years, you think, a goal that, you know, like, hey, you know, this is like Hot Ones or something next level where you're like, okay, the guests are no longer people that are here at local businesses in the area, but now it's like regional or state or, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I look at a lot of this stuff is all modeled after Joe Rogan, you know, similar cameras, setups, microphones, all this stuff. But the cool part about that is the ability to do these conversations in person. So I would like to get to the point where, like, if there's somebody that's really interesting, like be able to pay to fly them down, to stay at a hotel or something like that. Hey, you know, enjoy a weekend vacation in
Naples
Southwest
is
Florida.
a destination. Like this is, you have the location, you have the locale.
Yeah, so it's a good vacation spot that somebody could come to, but to be able to sit down and talk with them for a while. And you know, even in this short period of time of doing this and learning as much as I have, it's making me realize that I don't fucking know anything. Like we were talking about I read a whole, like 2/3 of this book about the founding fathers. And I'm like, yeah, I got a pretty good sense of this. And my buddy Mason's talking about this. And as he's talking, I'm just like, man, listening to my own responses on it, I'm like, I don't fucking know anything.
Yeah.
So,
well, hey, you know what? You're in great company. You know who also said that? Socrates. So that's the best way to approach this setup here. You're approaching like, look, I'm a blank slate. I know nothing. Teach me. Like that's such a healthy attitude to have. And I mean, that's some of my favorite kind of people to interact with, because you're like, look, you know, I'm sure you have a ton of, you know, stories and experiences that I would love to learn, and you know, your goals and all that. You know, that's I'm like curious about, and approaching the situation like, look, I don't know anything. I mean, in reality, we all there's so much more that we don't know that we know.
Yeah,
because there's so much out there to know.
And even the things that you think you know, you might just have a skewed perception on it.
Yeah.
So I do try to question it as much as possible. I do like that piece of like Socrates where it is just like question as much, but I also try to, I try to find that middle balance where I question things to the point where people want to answer, but also not question things so much that the entire city wants to kill me and jail me.
Well, yeah, you know what? That's kind of what, end up happened to Socrates. He had to drink the hemlock, and like, yeah, you probably don't want to end up like that.
No, I don't.
You really don't.
I think, so like long term in terms of like goals, I got this might sound really weird, but I got to see two different.
It can't be weirder than How I Met Your Brother. So
that's true. So it's not necessarily weird, but maybe like morbid. But so I got to see within like maybe a year of each other, I got to see two different people at very, very close to the end of their life, right? So I got to see my grandpa, who wasn't a great end of life. It was cancer, and then like not really accepting that he was gonna die, and it was pretty like it was a really like a kind of a gnarly process. And then after that, I went up to my wife's like great uncle or something had his 90th birthday party, and 70 people showed up to the nursing home.
Wow.
And it was like a fucking party, and everyone was like, oh yeah, great Uncle Howard, I remember this time when like, yeah, he gave us beers and we went out on the lake, and but he didn't tell our parents and stuff like that. And it was like two totally different opposite ends of the spectrum of like really harsh way to go versus at 90 years old, I've got 70 people that are around me that I brought together that are enjoying themselves. Like I definitely long-term want to end up more in that zone than the other. And I don't know, something just kind of tells me like, this is the path that I've got to go to get there. So I don't have like a 3 to 6 year plan necessarily. I've got like a 60-year plan
and 1 to 3. Okay. Interesting. I mean, likewise, hey, you know what? I'm kind of definitely favoring was it your other grandpa?
Which the positive?
Yeah.
No, the positive one was my wife's great uncle.
Wife's great uncle. So like, yeah, so kind of wife's great uncle. I like that idea. Obviously, I'm barbecuing, hosting events, super close to my heart. So yeah, I would. I'm right there with you.
So like, so when you work with people, how do you kind of set them up to get to that end result that they're looking for? Not everybody wants to end up in that spot, which I understand, but like when you start talking with customers or prospects and trying to guide people down this like better path, I mean, where do you start, and then how do you kind of guide them to get there?
I love that. This is another just gargantuan question. All right, let's see if I can just like put it down, cut into a couple pieces. All right. Piece number one, I think, just looking at retirement. So say if somebody's approaching late life, one of the things, I just had a meeting this morning right before our podcast. And, I asked, he's another financial advisor, and he came to me and he's like, hey, I'm getting, in my late years now, 70 plus, and his clients are coming up to him and he's like, hey, when are you going to retire? We're wondering, like, you're kind of looking like Santa Claus. Like, when will be the time? And then he, jokingly, he replies, like, when they're going to carry me out of the room horizontally.
Yeah. Work till you die type thing.
So I think there's a lot of truth to that, because in retirement, I think a real danger is abruptly retiring and being like, look, I've done what I've done, and now I'm completely starting off new. And I think, a clear story about that is, I know my dad, he would tell me this, like, look, sometimes guys would, all their lives never ride a motorcycle. And then boom, at retirement, they're like, look, I want to do something fun. I want to do something new. I'm going to get a big hog Harley, 900, 1,000 cc's, and start riding. Well, that's when, a lot of accidents happen, because it's a huge bike. People are not used to it. And I think it's a great metaphor for retirement. Like, it's better off, in my opinion, that, to taper off a work experience, maybe do, not a 9 to 5, but do like 3 days, 2 days, or do some kind of consulting if that's possible. And because many people have a lot of their identity through work. So who they are is defined by what they do. And into retirement, many people get a lot of joy from what they do. And like my client this morning, I think it's wonderful that he's like, look, I know I'm getting in there, my old age, and I'd like to, instead of abruptly retiring and becoming a pro pickleball player for, my 9 to 5, he's going to taper it off. And I think that's a really savvy way to retire. And if I would like recommend, some kind of strategy into that, like late, in game of the chess game, that would be
okay.
Really good. By the way, have you seen Queen's Gambit?
I saw the first episode of that.
Yeah.
I'm not a good gauge of shows because I'm like, man, I could really get into the show, and then I just don't watch it. I think Game of Thrones is the only show that I've really stuck out.
Oh man, till season 8. I mean, like,
well, what about agreed.
Yeah.
What about Queen's Gambit?
I'm just because in game of chess. I mean, that's another piece that I love to compare life to as a chess game. So I think that's important too. Is like, hey, you can have a strategy in chess where you're taking away pieces left and right, and then realizing what you end up with in that end game is very similar to life. Like, are you going to have 3 pawns and a knight, or are you going to end up with just your king? Like that, you those are some things to consider.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to think about the moves you make and all that kind of stuff. It's a good way of looking at it. It's somewhat adversarial too, but you kind of have to have. I think you kind of have to have some sort of adversary. Whether it's, I think the people that I respect the most that look at some of this stuff is like the adversary is themselves.
Yeah,
pretty much
playing the game against yourself. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, because the people that seem to find adversarial relationships with other people,
woof,
it's too dramatic. I can't be a part of it.
Me either.
I'm literally like allergic to it or something.
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people that all the time. Like, people say like, "Hey, Konrad, what are you allergic to?" And I'm like, the only thing I'm allergic to is bullshit.
Bullshit.
Yeah. So that's the only thing I'm allergic to. Like, and I agree. Like, especially like because the people around you are not your competition.
Yeah.
The real competition is yourself.
Yeah.
So you push yourself, and like it's like playing the chess game against yourself. That's going to be your, real opponent. And that's one thing I'm like super blessed with is, my friends and that I play pickleball with, volleyball with, soccer, whatever the sport is, ultimate frisbee. They all have very much that, it's like, okay, well, in the end of the day, it is a rivalry of points, but we're all there like enjoying ourselves, being active. And at the end of the day, the real competition is not the other team, is how well you can do in that sport, in that position, to get that point. And
yeah. Well, and I think you can, and I'm starting to try to figure out ways that I can do that, like mentally too.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were talking about this book, Mason was saying that the one thing that historians like about John Adams is that he, like, the reason why they like him as a historical figure is that he would actually like take pamphlets and stuff that he would read that have points, and then like put his like counter argument, like he would write down his counter argument, like what he disagreed with on that point. And I tried it last night with a book that I was actually just listening to, but it is interesting because you can start to look at these points and these ideas that come out and kind of find like the adversarial nature in that. And maybe by doing that, I'll be able to kind of engage in some of these discussions with people that really strongly disagree with me without going after them and attacking them, and basically keep it to those ideas. Because I think there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that I want to talk about that's really super uncomfortable and I don't know that much about, and it's super divisive. Like all of this stuff, political stuff, the vaccination stuff, like everything is like your fucking asshole tightens up. It's like, oh my God, like, hold on, like I can't talk about this. This is so uncomfortable. But like maybe by having that adversarial nature with just the ideas themselves, before you start talking to people, you won't take that stuff as personal, and you can start to like figure out a solution. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, two points of that. I think, one, that's incredible. I'm going to start doing that. I think that's super cool. I've never actually read a text or a book where I am noting down counter arguments to what I'm reading.
Right.
I'm always focusing on like, oh, I agree with this. Underline.
That's like what I ended up doing most of the thing, but still, like even just the thought of that.
And that really reminds me of Thucydides, like his Peloponnesian War text. Like he did that. I mean, because back then those authors, I mean, that's their life long, that's their book. Like they had, these, like it took them a lifetime to write. And so they would have one argument, and then they would create an argument that was like the straw man argument and argue against that. Then maybe even on a third level. So I remember one of my favorite professors in undergrad is Professor Little, rest in peace, because he's no longer with us, but he taught me that. And I really super echo what you're saying is like, hey, that's a really great way to approach a text or to approach something that you're learning is like, look, maybe just have on the side having your own arguing against that. I really like that idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of interesting that I ended up doing it with this book, but this one
what book is it, by the way?
one that I'm listening to is called The Courage to be Disliked.
Ooh. Yeah, here go. Okay, go ahead.
It's the Japanese
Courage
one.
to be Disliked. Okay, cool.
So
I'll have
like,
to check it out.
I just found out about it last night, but basically what it is just like it's a writing that is like a kid pretty much, like a teenager or 20-year-old, something like that, asking like a wise man about, like, here's how I see the world. You think the world is very simple. You think that people are very simple, and you think that people can change and people can be happy. I disagree. Let's talk about it. And it's like basically like a dialogue between a younger person and an older person. And it's really interesting to learn. I think I'm going to try to, as I like to write and try to get my ideas out, but maybe what I'll do is try to create some sort of dynamic like this in the way that I write, because the questions that come about from that are really interesting. It tests your assumptions, like, oh, everything is, predetermined, or, based on your history or your experience, things like that. And this is like one person questioning it, one person giving the feedback, but it's a dialogue. So you kind of get to the heart of the matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think one of those is I'm trying to visualize both those characters. And I really like this quote my brother would tell me all the time. He would say, you can entertain an idea without having to believe it.
Yeah.
Which I really like. Like I can imagine like the young teenager being like, look, being really cynical and just being like, look, like life's dark. Everybody's out to get me, I'm just always scared. I'm always coveting the things around me. And I feel like that is, a really young mentality and really immature one. And then I could see the older wise man being like, look, like, no, your biggest competitor is yourself. Like I can see where you're coming, I can entertain the idea of what you're thinking about. I don't have to believe these, all these people are holding daggers close to my back. I'm not Julius Caesar. So,
Et Brute?
Yeah. Brutus was kind of a jerk. Like, come on, dude, you're going to stab, your adopted dad in the back like that. Like, dude. And, I've seen, total tangent, but I've seen this little, I really kind of want it. It's like a pin holder that has the bust of Caesar and then holds like pencils in the back. I'm like, when we get out of here, that's going to my Amazon cart ASAP, because I've thought about that way too many times.
Hell yeah. Well, you just made it public, so it's
going to blow up.
You better get it before it goes out of stock.
Yeah. Well, get,
this podcast gets about 30 million downloads per episode, so you got to just be careful and get it.
1 to 3 year goal, dude. Like, and you know what I really liked about that? Because here's another really cool thing that I really like doing. Whenever you're talking about writing down goals and things that do, writing your goals down in the present. Like, as you have completed them. So in the past tense. So it's like, I have, 30 million listeners, or I have 100 new clients.
Yeah.
On my book. Like,
yeah,
that kind of goal setting has been super successful for me.
That, and it's funny that you say that, because I was just on a call maybe earlier this week or something like that, or maybe last week, where they were talking about that exact thing. He's like, all right, you're in the DeLorean. It's, New Year's Eve 2022.
Right.
Where are you at? And
right.
it actually made me think about some of the stuff in a different perspective, and like, okay, maybe if these things that I'm spending 30 hours a week on right now are kind of bullshit, and I'm just moving things around because I feel like I should. Maybe let me just like shrink that down to a handful of hours and slowly move it along, and then figure out how to actually get to these real goals. Because this is what I actually want to do. This is what I, feel like I should be doing for some obligation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I can totally empathize with that. And I mean, a very clear example for myself. I always had this idea that, like, look, I'm going to need a work for a firm doing financial planning for 5 years, like specifically just exclusively that, to then open up my own firm. I am so happy that I was just like, you know what, pull the trigger. I'm going to open up my own company. And that's like one of the best decisions I've ever made. Never been happier with that, because that has given me the independence. That's our motto at Prus Advisory, is welcome to independence. And I love that in my own work, and I love that to provide that to the people that I help, because and I think that's where also kind of going like full circle to your situations. Like, look, I have these things that I think I have to do, but really the independence is like where you want to be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that's just go there. Like, why are you here? Have that goal. I have 30 million listeners. Like, that's the goal. Like, and I can see it. Like, you're totally capable of that. There's a lot of juice here to be squeezed. So
thank you.
Very strong stream of juice. So
dude, on that note, fuck yeah, that's the way we wrap it up.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Man, I'm glad we finally got to do this. It has been it's been about a month in the making. We'll probably end up doing this again at some point soon. So
sounds good.
Dude, before we wrap up, tell people where they can find you, your business, how they can connect with you, LinkedIn.
It's on my shirt, on the mug. There you go. That's all you need.
Well, for the people that are listening.
Listening
at home.
Listening at home, Prus Advisory. That's all you need to know.
All right. And then can they connect with you on like LinkedIn or something?
Always welcome. I've had students from my alma mater do it. One of the biggest things that I'd say is, to where I am today, is that there's been a lot of people that have reached down with a helping hand to pull me up. So I'm right there along that chain to, if somebody needs that helping hand, that LinkedIn, or, you just Google my company name and you're going to find me.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure, Chris.
All right. Thank you, everybody.